Sound check 1 2. Sound test microphone 1 2. Hey.
practice session is in progress. You cannot join a practice session on your mobile. I'm not on my mobile. I'm using the same technology as I used last week, which was on my tablet. Checking if you can hear me. Last week you can hear me on the call, but unfortunately I can't hear anyone else. Shall I completely log out and come back in? I can hear someone.
hear you. You have to unmute yourself, yes.
Okay.
You're okay?
Okay, yes.
Very good. Dr. Liu, are you okay? Alright, okay. Alright, very good everyone. Thank you. We'll be starting soon. Sixth session of Road to to Recovery. Our MC today is Rohaiza Muhammad from the Industry Development Division, and the moderator is of course Dr. Liu. You've met virtually. I'll be passing this to Rohaiza to take it away. Thank you.
Hello everyone. So the live session will start in 4 minutes. I'll be waiting for the cue from Malaysia to begin the session. So we have like 3 more minutes to go. Assalamualaikum and very good evening everyone. My name is Rohaiza Muhammad and I'll be your host for today. So welcome to Mike's webinar series, Road to Recovery, episode 6 on navigating COVID-19 crisis in the new competitive high-tech industry landscape. With us today, we have our moderator, Dr. Liu Kan Eun, the Chief Executive Officer of Aerospace Malaysia Innovation Centre, AMIC, and distinguished panelists, Dr. Biki Bangu, Board Member of MITE and President, Southeast Asia, Pacific, South Korea, Rolls-Royce Singapore, and TK Tan, Managing Director of Clarion Malaysia. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping rules. Participants must mute your microphones and turn off your video upon entrance. For those who are joining via mobile, please press *6 to mute. Questions to panelists are to be addressed in the chat box after the moderator announced that the Q&A session is open. If you encounter audio problems, please alert the Secretariat through the chat box or try to exit and re-enter the seminar using the same link given. Now, with pleasure, I would like to invite Dr. Liu Kan Eun to begin our discussion today. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for all those that are attending today, and thank you for your time. Dr. Vicky and also TK Tan, thank you for joining us today. So I will now start the session. Thank you very much for the host to introduce the panelists. I will then do a bit of scene setting in terms of the overall structure of what we're doing today. First and foremost, the scene setting. From what we know today, a Black Swan event has happened. And a Black Swan event is classified as economic recession and pandemic, changing trajectory of normal government, economics, and business alteration through the course of history. The Black Death, for example, in the 13th, broke the long ingrained feudal system in Europe and replaced it with a more modern employment contract. A mere 3 centuries later, a deep economic recession, thanks to a 100-year war between England and France, kickstarted a major innovation drive that radically improved agricultural productivity. Fast forward to today, the SARS pandemic of 2002-2004 catalyzes the meteoric growth of the then small e-commerce company called Alibaba and helped establish it as a forefront of retail in Asia. The growth was fueled by underlying anxiety around travel and human contact, similar to what we see today with COVID-19. The financial crisis of 2008 also produced its own disruptive side effect. Airbnb and Uber shot up to popularity across the West as a subprime crisis meant to lower savings and income for the masses, forcing people to share assets in the form of spare rooms, car rentals, or car rides in order to cover deficits. With COVID-19 as what we have today, we are already seeing early signs of shift to how consumers and business behave. Remote working is being encouraged by tech and non-tech companies alike. Airlines' profitability is getting impacted, and those seat capacity supply chains are getting disrupted globally. Some of these changes are direct, short-term responses to the crisis and will revert to regular levels once COVID-19 is contained. However, some of these shifts will continue on, creating a long-term disruption that will shape today's business for decades to come. So this is roughly the overall introduction of the topic that we have today, which is basically titled as Navigating the COVID-19 Crisis into a New Competitive High-Tech Industry Landscape. So I open the floor to both the panelists to answer some questions. This will take about 40 minutes. There will be 5 questions in total, and I will start with the first one. So the first question today is going to be, in just a few months, a mysterious isolated illness has morphed into a fast-moving global pandemic, changing the way we live, work, and upending entire industries, including aerospace and electronics. Can you both Dr. Vicky and TK Tan, can you give us a snapshot on the impact of COVID-19 to your respective sectors and how it changes the landscape of the industry? So perhaps, Dr. Vicky, you can start off.
Thank you, Ken, and delighted to be here this afternoon to join the panel discussion. I'm assuming you can hear me. Just give me a quick thumbs up if you can. Great. So the impact of the industry has been significant, and we all just have to look around that we are living, we are working in a very different way as to what we were just a few months ago. The COVID on the airlines has been very, very significant. Airlines have stopped flying many of their flights, as you are all aware of, and airlines have also grounded a lot of the flights in return as well. So there's been that immediate impact that we've seen in the industry. And then the more longer term horizon really depends on how the COVID situation continues to evolve. And the cost of doing business in a high value manufacturing such as the aerospace and where airlines operate is significant. And when you start looking at that, the cost of has been more I would say pushed to the right-hand side, because it's going to take time for the confidence of the industry to restore itself, the consumers to restore the confidence. It's not just the consumers alone. It is also the borders and the policies and the regulations that governments have rightly imposed on the borders in terms of where and one can travel. So all of this together has put significant impact on the industry. And if you look at some of the announcements of how flights have been grounded, or if you look at some of the announcements how airlines and manufacturers of aircraft have reduced their forecast as well, reduced their forecast in terms of new aircraft deliveries. So this has been quite a significant percentage drop. and the numbers that are out there are that it could be anywhere from 2023 to 2025 for recovery in some parts of the industry. What we do anticipate is that the more sort of regional travel and the more sort of intercity travel will come first, and then the longer haul will be more to the right hand side. So this has been a significant impact. But then on the other side is the supply chain, especially in a industry where it's high value manufacturing in place. And global supply chains means it's not just the movement of people, it is the movement of goods as well that we need to get across the border from one location to another. Although the goods are moving at a much more better place than it was a few months ago, that is showing good signs of recovery, and in some instances, but then you have to marry all of that logistics hurdle with the people hurdle and the sort of the industry challenge that we face.
Okay, thank you very much, Vicky. TK, how about you want to weigh in here on your sector, which is mainly on electronics, as well as a bit of automotive? Are you also seeing the same kind of challenge with regards to logistics, movements of goods to supply chain?
Thanks for allowing me to partake in this discussion. Coming from the automotive supply chain, yeah, it is massively different. For example, a quick one would be, since World War I and II, there's never been a stop of manufacturing of cars. They may turn it into military vehicles and everything else, but there's never been a total stop around the world. What COVID-19 has done is basically stop activity of manufacturing in 92 countries, full stop, and automotive especially. You cannot run an operation like that without people working in close proximity in an area. So to see a quarter loss in total productivity in automotive is unprecedented. With a lockdown in 2 months and a ramp up in 1 month, you can safely say every car manufacturer basically stopped working for a quarter this year. Now, given that 2019 delivered about 100 million cars outside China, you have just seen a total loss of 25 million cars that is not recoverable. And even though the ramp up has, even if it's completed the ramp up, what you actually have is another 3 quarters, which is 75 million car capacity. But then you have a problem in who is going to consume those cars. Given that MCO has stopped traveling internally and externally, that means aeroplanes stop flying, people stop traveling. And who would suddenly go and buy a car? When you know that there is going to be massive economic downturn, everyone's worried about being laid off or retrenched. The last thing on their mind is buying a car. And when you look at the car supply chain, literally is economics of most countries. Car manufacturer has got a supply chain that is absolutely extensive. A normal what do you call a internal combustion engine carries about 10,000 parts. Can you imagine the supply chain and how many people work through there? And how are those parts going to get to the factory? If one part doesn't arrive, the car doesn't get made. So the total logistic nightmare, the supply chain nightmare, on top of the fact that you can't even get across border when you have a global supply chain for automotives. So the impact is seriously unprecedented and something that you can't prepare for. Having said that, if you look back on what we are hoping for coming future, like Dr. Vicky was talking about, you're looking at 3 to 5 years recovery plan. It won't happen overnight.
Okay, so from what I'm hearing from both of you is the timeline in terms of 3 to 5 years recovery time is the same between both the automotive and the aerospace. This is quite interesting in terms of how we look at it. Of course, in terms of both the supply chain, you have two completely different supply chain in terms of how complex it is, as well as number of parts. I mean, TK, you mentioned a bit about how many parts there are in a car. Of course, in an aircraft, this is we're talking about at least 1 order of magnitude much higher. And maybe Vicky, you can touch upon that in terms of how the supply chain, in terms of the number of parts that we're navigating throughout the world, how that has impacted by COVID-19. Sorry, Vicky?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Great. Yes, you're right. The magnitude, if I just look at one of our engines, it can be anywhere between 18,000 to 22,000 part numbers. So it is a significant number of parts that goes into one of our products. And I want to touch back on the side of the global supply chain, which TK also mentioned is hugely important for our industries. I would classify both as manufacturing, and I would classify both as high value manufacturing, because some parts are just of those nature. But if we take a step back and just look at the manufacturing sector as a whole, and what you'll sort of see and a kind of trajectory that we were on from a manufacturing side is that there was a huge amount of focus on globalization. I'm taking you back in time here, so let's just put ourselves sort of 3 years back. Huge amount of focus on globalization, a huge amount of focus on scale, where do you get scale leverage, and a huge amount of focus on cost. And if we fast forward to today's challenge that we have today, it is looking at a strategy from every single lens, and the one that comes out very prominently in the manufacturing sector is the resilience of the strategy. How resilient are we when we look at being able to take products and services from A to B? So all of this has really sort of put a very different thinking on it. And what's also encouraging to see is that actually many of the manufacturing industries started advancing towards smart manufacturing and started using digital tools and processes to augment some of their processes and to be much more supply chain effective. And they're the ones that during the challenge of today in the COVID have actually been much more resilient. They're the ones that we saw across many of the sectors that started to recover much more quickly. And if you overlay that with how the government has been opening up the borders, it is also the ones that have allowed companies, and especially the sectors that they know, not only at a country level, but at a company or an industry or an organization level, the investment and digital has been there. So there's a level of assurance that you can have in terms of the sustainability of what you're trying to achieve. So the strategy is much more focused on resilience today as it was to previously.
Okay, thank you very much for that comment. You touched a bit upon what I wanted to ask you in question 2 with regards to a bit of technology, and you mentioned the word, although I think you've consciously avoided mentioning the word digitalization a few times. So maybe I can bring that out a bit more in the second question, which starts off as consumer confidence and the economy are intrinsically linked. And both will remain suppressed beyond the short term, and we have already seen that, for about 12 to 18 months. This is what experts are estimating. Amid all of these uncertainties, industry demand has been postponed. Some have started to execute business transformation or divergence in their business model. How does, again, your relative industrial sectors respond to this? Maybe TK, you can start off first.
Okay. And another way of looking at the automotive region is like you compare electrification versus the traditional car. An electric vehicle has got a maximum of 14 modules. So it is much easier to produce an electric vehicle than the supply chain of an internal combustion engine car. So the move, it's basically, it's a quantum leap, because the new norm, nobody's resetting. I mean, if you look at the nature is resetting itself, but actually we are leapfrogged forward 3 years in a minimum time, because you're at a gap between the old traditional way of making a car and the new way of making an electric vehicle. Electrification itself will have to take the quantum leap, because that is the only way to address the new norm. And you should be able to do that much more efficiently, like Dr. Vicky was talking about, innovation and new technology to replace the old. And that quantum leap actually is doing at lightning speed right now in this industry of automotive. And if you look at the requirement for that, we are caught in a gap, because everyone is talking about doing it gradually, what you call in an evolution way, but now you don't have a choice. You have to move forward in that kind of lightning speed. So you can see the push for business transformation, the push for electrification or innovation. It's at very, very high speed, and it's getting difficult because you have to amortize, you have to pay, and then you have to make sure if people want to buy it. So it's a lot of unknown right now in the system, as far as I know, in terms of automotive.
Okay. Thank you very much. Vicky?
You can echo some of TK's points. I think digitization is already playing a significant impact. But the good news is that it's not something that we're just starting now. The industry has been looking at developing the solutions, embedding the solutions, and deploying the solutions. And this is across all the manufacturing sites in terms of how parts come in. So even the logistics has a DNA thread, and the parts, how they flow through your flow line, that has a DNA thread. And when it comes out and into service, that has a DNA thread as well. So all of that is pretty well stitched together. And where we're looking at now is much more about the sustainable partnerships that you have. And when you think about sort of what sustainability means in the aerospace industry and what it means for the airlines, it is much more sustainable travel. And the sustainable travel could come from various different elements. One part that TK alluded to is the electrification, which is definitely already impactful in the automotive industry. We've also taken solutions such as electrification into the vessels, into marine vessels, and they've been hugely successful for us. We've demonstrated electrification into locomotives, where we've actually put embedded electric start generators with diesel gensets. So all of this is tried and tested platforms that we know we can take to the market. And now the same focus is coming on electrification on the aerospace side as well. So the technology and the cross-fertilization of technologies between sectors, between industries, and really focusing on the sustainability strategy on whatever that means for various different companies and organizations, whilst really bringing the whole industry together is fundamental. And a lot of the our partners, our customers, our suppliers are all talking the same language, which is actually very encouraging.
Yeah.
So what today's situation has unfolded is actually how do we balance and how do we strike the balance of what our future looks like and collectively get there.
I think you touched upon a very interesting part towards the end. Before COVID, everybody was facing their own struggles, their own challenges in terms of organization or within a supply chain vein. But when COVID-19 happened, every single industry across the world, regardless of sector, regardless of your size, have undergone a tremendous amount of stress in terms of their organizational structure, their business models that they've had, and as well as the recovery model. And I think one of the things that we've seen a lot throughout the industry, both in aerospace and automotive, is the kind of collectiveness to come together and say, okay, we are all facing one problem now. How do we cope? How do we recover? And how do we advance from there? I think one of the things that you both mentioned is in terms of transformation, whether it's electrification, investments in technology that was supposed to be in the pipeline or something 5 years down the line has been brought forward. Do you think this is, if I may, so bold, a positive thing that came out from COVID-19?
I think if you... So sorry, TK, I got really excited by the question there. We've got two fundamental things there, and one is the role of the government and the ecosystem that is around us. And it's been very encouraging to see the significant amount of support that's come from Malaysia government and many other countries as well. And then it's the ecosystem of partnerships that we have. This is not that we're saying that now's the time to forge new partnerships with universities. Now's the time to forge new partnerships with polytechnics or with AMIC or various others. It is actually leveraging on those partnerships and taking that to the next level. Now's the time to do so. It is expensive to invest in new technologies and innovation, but with trusted partnerships, you can get there much quicker. So actually the foundation is kind of like already there. But we need to bring two significant aspects into that foundation and that ecosystem. One is the support and the role of the government, so the alignment with the national level of strategy. And the other is our people, and our people that we sort of invest and sort of equip with the right skills, not for today's jobs, but for tomorrow's readiness.
Okay, TK?
If you look at car basically are mechanical devices. If you go back in time, you see car key opening doors. You have to wind down the window, pull the choke to keep it warm before the carburetor fires properly.
I have not heard that word for a long time, huh? Choke.
And now everyone is trying to do organically evolve into the new device. But with COVID-19, if you see the price of Tesla today, you don't have time. And the difficulty of doing an organic evolution is car wasn't meant to be software. If you go back 10, 15 years, we talk about dreams, but we didn't imagine it will be software driven. Now, if you look at that, then you realize the whole industry has to do a total paradigm shift. That means you got to bring in new talent that was never there, that was never required there, that wasn't even part of the engineering team. And that in itself is a frightening experience for most car makers, never mind suppliers, because nothing works without software today. Just like anything else, the car will not work without software. If you look at the amount of cable in the car, do you know that there are about 3 kilometers of cable inside the car? And the new car that I wouldn't dare to name has got less than 600 meters. And it's more than 50% software driven. And the car is delivered without it being completed so that every month you get your upgrade. That's something we can never imagine. You test it to death before you put it on the road. But when you look at this, how can you be prepared for something that you only talk about, but now you got to deliver?
Indeed, you touch upon something that just popped into my mind, the traditional old Nokia 3310, the indestructible phone versus what we have today.
Precisely. So can you imagine the talent pool requirement and the new strategy? It's totally alien to even the industry. And they have to adopt and they have to do the transformation immediately. I can't, like Dr. B was talking about partnership with the academics fraternity as well as the government. I think even the stakeholders in the industry are at a loss. If you look at Japanese car industry, they still have their board over 60 years old. And a lot of 60-year-olds that I know uses an iPhone as a phone, not as a device. And can you imagine them trying to restructure the organization so that they actually include what is required going forward when they themselves have problem dealing with a phone? I think the task is really daunting right now.
Okay, interesting that you brought this up, because I think the next one we would definitely touch upon the topic of talent and how talent can actually help us to move forward. So one of the other things that was also mentioned is the revisiting or the revision of the goals that we have set out pre-COVID-19, for example. We know that the goals that we originally set out needs to be achieved, but it needs to be readjusted or to relooked based on what has happened with COVID-19. In other words, we need to quickly rethink what the business as usual is like post-COVID-19. Even though that we have some unusual businesses now, some of the goals will remain the same, while others will shift slightly and even more radically or reinvent or even discard it in terms of the goals that we had set before. So in response to this, how do you respond to the reactive measures in terms of, let's say, the balance of value and speed in which we need to, let's say, overcome this COVID-19 hurdle? And what are the key action areas that has been prioritized in, let's say, the aerospace industry for Vicky and for TK in terms of electronics and automotive industry? Vicky, how about you take this one first?
Sure, thank you. I think it's a very broad question, but if I can sort of start it from a few different areas. There are external economic factors which are beyond the control of the industry. And these external economic factors, so let's look at the demand for an example. We know that the demand has dropped by a considerable percentage. And these are could be anywhere between 40 to 50% as a very broad stroke that the industry impact has seen in terms of the drop in demand. And we know that the demand is going to take several years to recover at the same time. So what do you do in that period? You need to adjust and position the business to be able to deliver the short-term demand, but then at the same time be ready for the future as well. No government support can create demand. The demand, it literally is from the external economic factors which are beyond the control in this situation of industries. But here, and the point that you alluded to, I think that the opportunity for us in this time frame is where we've already seen successes in many of the countries, and I would openly and wholeheartedly say in Malaysia as well, is government, industry, academia working together in full alignment, in really understanding what is the national agenda, and at the same time understanding what is the company strategy, where do they fit together, how do we reduce the cost base, how do we upskill the people, and be ready for that future. No one company, no one government, no one country can do it on their own. And then building that trusted partnership with our nodes. And in Malaysia, we've got this huge opportunity of ASEAN. We've started that narrative, but we haven't fully exploited it. And now is the time to really engage deeply with ASEAN where it makes sense and try and bridge not just market opportunities, but skills, talents, capabilities, new supply chain. The other aspect that we've also realized in the manufacturing industry is that proximity matters. Because logistics becomes such a hurdle with a situation like the COVID, proximity matters. And when you're closer, it actually helps. So ASEAN for Malaysia is significant, and I think that's a low-hanging fruit, together with bringing government, industry, academia together.
Okay, thank you. TK, your thoughts?
Well, from my personal perspective, I can tell you one win that we have, which is very simple. We have internal R&D. And when push comes to shove, you recreate, you reinvent, you diversify because of the engineering capability. If I'm only in manufacturing today with no engineering potential internally, I can't do anything. And if you look at electrical and electronics engineering, sad to say, every electronics engineer has to reinvent himself every 5 to 10 years because technology moves. And the time frame is getting shorter. So you literally have to reinvent yourself every 5 years with new knowledge, new device, new capability, and everything else. Now, in the short term of the MCO of 3 months, we have come up with a strategy for close to 10 to 12 products, which is not our conventional run-of-mill products. And you can only do that if you have an R&D. So the value for the perception of the government on talent building, on the ecosystem that requires to support R&D, to me, it's absolutely vital at this stage. Because if the country, I can tell you, for example, I think Pakistan, Bangladesh is 92% textile manufacturing. And now all the shops are closed, and some of them are closed permanently. Your massive impact on the economy is not salvageable if you're purely on textile manufacturing. If you are in a situation where you have a control on the economy of the country with a bit of engineering capability, R&D, incorporated talent building, you can realign yourself much faster. And that intrinsic value, I can tell you, is hitting home for us, being able to demonstrate across the world within the group that we've got local talents that are hungrier than a lot of other countries, and their idea matters. And that to me is a clear win. So if any governments, Malaysian governments want to go through and check what are these effort that's been made, you really need them. You really need the engineers. You really need the talent pool. You really need the R&D investments to be able to realign yourself at this juncture and point. There's no other way to do it.
Well, thank you very much for that comment. I think what both of you have mentioned, just to mention a bit, this is basically the bread and butter of AMID. we do R&D and we do R&T, and we're basically saying how important this is to really evolve, whether it is an incremental involvement or a leapfrog involvement or evolution in terms of technology. This is something that has to be done, irregardless of what we see in terms of the challenges globally. And TK, you touched upon a lot about that. And on the other side, for Vicky, you talked about cooperation between the industry, the academics, and the government. This is, again, something that Amit brings onto the table to have three parties come to the table, discuss, and see where we can move forward from there. So touching back on
I'll just add one more. I'll just add one more, if you don't mind. And the point here that we've learned in our sector, in our industry, is the partnership with MSCs and SMEs. Mm-hmm. Huge amount of creativity, innovation, and ideas flow both ways.
Yep.
And it is only recently that I've seen examples, and very successful examples, that have benefited both parties when they work in that type of relationship and that partnership. I know AMIC has been sort of the catalyst to sort of bringing MNCs and SMEs together, and there's various other models in many other geographies that are doing exactly the same. What I would encourage to our audience is to seek out those opportunities. The MNCs are very open. They will not only just engage with MNCs. They don't have that luxury anymore. And actually, there's a huge amount of benefit and value that has been unlocked and coming from the untapped potential of SMEs. And I think that is another low-hanging fruit that we must not forget.
Indeed. What I was trying to say, and I think you touched upon that, is that we've started this startup culture in terms of having small companies having a brilliant idea and it having the proper funding, a proper channel to really impact and create the kind of ripple effect that it's supposed to do. And I think the collaboration here, especially in these times of COVID-19, I mean, during the time when Malaysia was locked down, you had a lot of both hobbyists as well as small-time companies having 3D printers come together and see what they could do to help. Amit was one of it, having our own 3D printers within the company as well. We tried to do what we could without thinking in a more commercial term that we are more used to. We just wanted to help society. And I think this is where we could really start to catalyze, whether your company is big or small, the kind of change that we could do not only at a commercial front, but really on a humanitarian front. I think what has happened and what we have touched upon, you talk about proximity, you talk about talent. This is something that COVID-19 has tested it in these ways. We've always, and Vicky, you've touched upon this, I think last week, with regards to proximity. Before, we've always been used to flying to our customers or flying to our clients, have a face-to-face meeting and discussion with them. But today, we're having this forum virtually completely. And it's a bit strange not to see an audience, but it's something that we have to get used to as a new norm. And I think this has also impacted how we integrate and how we react to the organization that we have respectively, whether it's a big company such as Rolls-Royce or other small companies like, for example, AMIC and other SMEs as well.
We in terms of like the last 30 years, I would say manufacturing 30 years ago were outsourcing assembly, okay, parts of assemblies. And then they outsourced supply chain, for people to do logistics and everything for them. Lately, I'm beginning to see outsourcing of R&D. And I can see the SMEs like Dr. Vicky was talking about. The outsourcing of R&D is not between the multinational. Is between the local site of talents that they can get hold of to assist them to develop products, develop modules, develop parts of whatever they need. And they're willing to work with SME in that kind of way. So the talent pool requirement is not in MNCs, it's actually across the whole supply chain.
It's a really fair point. And it's the ecosystem that co-creates and co-shares and co-invests. And if you can get that pedigree right, and this is where I keep leading to the point that government has a big role to play here, it can really, really open up huge amount of potentials in that ecosystem. And having that right foundation is hugely important.
Okay, I think looking at the time as my job as a moderator, I need to shove things along. So the fourth question that we have today is that the OEMs are much better positioned now than they were going into the downturn of 2008 to 2009. They are already responding, accessing lines of credits, shutting plants, furloughing employees, deferring and reducing executive salary, and postponing investment of future programs, which we can touch upon in terms of research and development as well. But through these early moves, even though that they are bold and appropriate given the urgency of it, what would be the guiding principle or the ultimate priority of the OEMs? And maybe Vicky, you can start off with this. What are the ultimate priorities of the OEMs that they need to abide in recalibrating their contingency plan given the COVID-19 situation?
Yeah, I think we've touched on quite a lot of the elements already, but the main part would be to sort of understand what's changed from the customer's perspectives and the demand side of the area, and what's changed from the supplier side of perspective as well, and trying to map together against a new world of what your new demand looks like and the new position looks like, the new resilience strategy looks like. So here it's very much about understanding and balancing and striking a healthy balance between the supply and the demand, forecasting with your strategy mindset how to plan for the future and what the future would look like, and then overlaying that with your operational framework to say what is the right size, fit, and purpose to be able to win that prize that you're strategizing for. So it has, I wouldn't say, and we must be really careful here, this is not about sort of throwing everything out the window and starting from scratch. It is literally looking at the success that the organizations or the industry have had today and reevaluating what needs to be emphasized more, what needs to be done less, looking at your partnerships and collaborators. Where do you need to strengthen more? Where do you need to adjust? Where do you need to prioritize? And building a strategic market opportunity mindset together with an operational execution framework that allows you to get there. And I think that's really important. And all COVID is done. You know, today it's COVID, tomorrow it might be something else. We must have a resilient strategy in place. And this is just really, in one way, and I wouldn't say that no company was thinking resilience. That's not fair to say. But this has impacted and really highlighted that when there's a situation that impacts everyone and everywhere, that is a challenge. Now, how do you build resilience on that type of challenge?
Yeah, we will leave that open question because that's actually question 5. So maybe I can go over to TK. How about your comments in terms of what are the needs to recalibrate the contingency plan that you had before COVID, and what was it now after COVID?
I think there is the advantage of being small. If you're in a big corporate and they work in small groups, it's like a big ship. You take a long time to turn that around. In a smaller commando style operation, you get to do that a lot faster. So there are advantages for being small, and there are different advantages for being big. In the OEM, being able to organize funding, finances, and everything, probably yes, but they're talking directly with the government. But I see the kind of aftermath, the amount of zeros behind the numbers that they're asking for assistance. It's beyond what I can imagine. But if you're a small company, and if you're, shall I say, a small part of the whole picture, you can move a lot faster. And I think the big company has their smaller entities all moving by themselves much faster to make it move in a better way. In terms of what I'm thinking is in the new norm, you can't do everything under one wing. You have to have collaborations now, because you're not going to get there fast enough by doing everything in-house. It's like you want a cake and eat it at the same time. It's not going to happen in time for you. So the collaboration part means opportunities for smaller players who can put up their hands and say, hey, look, I can do this. What about that? A good example, if you're talking about sensor fusion, in aeroplane, they use LiDAR, they use radar, they use cameras. Cars do the same, drones do the same. You can draw the parallel to decide where you want to move in. We start to rip our products apart and try to reinvent the wheel, meaning if you break the products into 4 parts, you can suddenly realize they can address different things. And that part of the engineering where I have to respect the younger generation because they have an unblinkered mind. and they're crazy enough to want to try something different. And this is the time. This is the time where we are willing to listen. And the smaller corporations, definitely, if they can come up with some crazy ideas, I'm there to listen, because there is no way it can come from the top. It has to come from all over around you right now.
I think, yes, you're right with using the word crazy. I think for larger corporations, I think the words that we use is agility. but you are right. Larger OEM type companies, it is like steering a ship. It is a bit more difficult to really be more agile. But I think we were heading towards that direction even before COVID.
But can you imagine if you make 10 millions internal combustion engine car, you have to deal with electrification right now. It's an absolute nightmare. The total process, it's not even anywhere close to what you do.
Yeah. But okay. So before that, I just want to say to the audience who are listening in, we're about to move to the last question, although we are still maintaining in question 4. We're about to move to the 5th question. So if you do have any questions that you'd like to pose to Vicky and to TK here, please do post it so that we can take that after question 5. But coming back to what we wanted to say regarding the question 4 and the agility that we're looking at, how is it that OEMs or even smaller companies, how we're able to navigate this when we know the demand is not there at the moment? And I think the numbers that we're looking at, going back to the start of this session, was numbers of 2023, 2024, that we will, at least on the aerospace or aviation side, we're looking at getting back to the norm of 2019 in about 2023, 2024. How will this dip in terms of demand pull us or influence us in our way to transform and to have the agility that we need? Because it is a bit of the unknown in which we're going through, because this has never happened. In terms of the global pandemic and the global economic downturn that we're seeing. So, TK, maybe
go ahead.
Okay, yes. Vicky, go ahead.
I think it's a fair question, but we also have to put into the calibration is the sustainability agenda and how this overlays every organization's strategy. And sustainability will mean many different things to many different organizations. For some, it will mean resilience. For some, it will mean emissions. For others, it will mean fuel consumption, so CO2 emissions. There's lots of different sustainability perspectives. And then you also have to look at sustainability comes into operations as well. How do you, especially in the world of manufacturing, make products? We, for example, have committed to going zero carbon by 2030 in our factories. That is a huge challenge, but it's a bold challenge. And we haven't refrained from that challenge, but we want to continue. So I think what we now need to look at is the time that we have, whilst the supply and the demand, for which your question alluded to, may not be fitting, but that there is a direction that the society is moving towards, that people's voices are moving towards, our stakeholders and shareholders are moving towards, governments and policies are moving towards. Now, how do you position yourself against that? This time could be a gift in many ways as well. So it's actually using and positioning for that future.
I mean, certainly with COVID-19, it has brought about the awareness in which Earth, or let's say nature, can actually, in a sense, not say fight back, but influence our day-to-day lives in terms of how we're used to governing certain things, how we're used to running organization, and how the world is actually connected. COVID-19 actually brought us to the realization, the kind of impact that we can have, and the responsibility that we have to the environment. I mean, again, speaking on behalf of aerospace, we've had this accountability question since 2008, when ICAO signed the required thing that we are all now accountable to try to reduce our carbon emission in terms of aviation. We have the UN that recently took part with CORSIA, that by 2023, or even starting in 2020, we're supposed to be now accountable for the carbon emission in which we give out. So these kind of movements, I think, due to COVID-19, has brought us more awareness rather than the industry trying to do it by itself. Now people are getting more aware that there is a movement here that has already started before COVID-19 to really be more responsible in terms of what we do and how we look at the environment, not only in terms of the workspace around us, but actually the environment as a whole in terms of the earth. Perhaps TK, would you like to weigh in on this as well?
To me, it's look, nature resets itself. Everyone has been sending WhatsApp to show you what nature has done. So the part where you are eco-friendly, it's coming to the front for everyone to see. For myself, a really strange thing. I live in the same residence for the last 25 years. I have never seen scenery like I did after 3 months of MCO. I'm not lying. I've seen sceneries, but I've never known what I can see out of my window until after 3 months of MCO. Probably I'm not there long enough, but more than that, the sceneries changed a lot, you know, and that is nature itself. But when you look at what the business and the industry has to do, I think I don't think pollution is going to take the center stage. However, quick resolution to provide jobs, to defend salary payment, for example, for me, is key. So in our corporates, in our side, we already announced to the people that work with me, not working for me, working with me, that we probably will be looking at 50% salary cut. And that reason is very simple, because we don't want anyone to go home without anything for being retrenched. And that has to be in a group understanding. I have the privilege of doing that. I suppose in different companies, different. We haven't had a single retrenchment in 50 years by doing things like that. And it's an internal culture. And the answer is simple. I mean, when everyone sat down, either we go 150% capacity or we're going to lose 30% anyway. So everyone has to wade in now to make things happen. And I think the focus is, we've never been driven that way. You know, because in part of a big group means you can always have other rooms to move. But now it's like, you know, you don't save your own team is going to disappear. And a lot of focus has been going into that. That's where the kind of crazy products that come out on the discussion and brainstorming works, because you're redefining everything, you know, like everyone wants to talk about not owning a car, but sharing a car. But suddenly you can't share a car because you're scared of getting into mobility as a service. So you have to come out with solutions for that. So you're taking things one stage further, but you have to think differently. And that's a refreshing thought for being an engineer. For me, that's what the definition of being an engineer is. But engineer has been pushing pens and doing all the unnecessary things. And this time you get to play. You really get to play. And I like that.
Yeah. And also a slight comment about you seeing new scenery is probably because you spend more time at home now than you can actually look out the window. Okay, right. So let's carry on to question 5. Again, for those that are listening in and those that are on the various channels to connect here, please do post your questions that we may take after this last question that we have. So the last question that we have is, what must the industry leaders do? Resilience, as mentioned by both of you, is required. And in this case, resilience requires creativity and often leads to the innovation and reinvention. There is no doubt that the aerospace and automotive industry is facing challenges unlike anything it has ever seen before. The crisis demands that company leaders act swiftly and decisively, not just for the good of the firm they helm, but also because of the industry, given the scale and scope, is integral to the global economy. So going back to the front part of the question, which is where the question lies, is what advice would you give as industry leaders to really weather through the current climate? Perhaps TK? Sorry, Vicky, go ahead, yes.
Oh, sorry, TK, please.
No. I think, for example, I'm stressing a lot on talent because really I am digging in every direction of the know-how in terms of innovation and recreate products that cost millions. You need to have talent, because you're not going to pull a quick fast trick. It is serious engineering innovation. And the collaboration that Dr. Vicky was talking about with governments, with academias and everything. First, we have to know the definition of training talent. If we do it the traditional way, we can count the sacrifices and the losses along the way, or the wastage along the way. But if you look at the requirements of skills today versus 30 years ago, Dr. Biki, I'm sure you can understand the skills are totally, vastly different. You want a rounded person, you want a person who can think for himself. It's a long list of wants and wish from corporate side. But how do we work with the academias, academic establishment? How do we make the government understand that this is what we need by definition? You know, how can we share this know-how with them so that they put their money in the right decision, or shall I say, in the right direction? Because you can go back and check again how much is being used for talent building and what is the result. And I think now we can paint many different types of stories from any kind of statistics. But when the chips are down right now, you can see with your bare eyes whether you're going to dig yourself out or not. And that will serve as a good, how do you say it, picture for what you're going to do next. So you want a better results, you want a different results. You haven't done anything wrong, but you've just managed to basically have a report on what the effort has been done and what are the results, and you better it right now. Like in engineering, it's the same way. You won't get everything perfect round one, but the pursuance of trying to get it better is important. And I think talent building is an absolute key to dig ourselves out of this one. And I don't want to underestimate that part, because seriously, it is important.
You've actually touched upon a very interesting question that you had there. I would challenge this to you again later on, but maybe I can get Dr. Biki's view on the question.
Thank you. I would echo many of those points. Any organization or any industry can have a really sound, robust strategy.
Biki, sorry, I think I have lost you there. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, now it's good.
Okay, great. So where I started was any organization or industry can have a robust strategy. It may even have the luxury of the investments to be able to exploit and implement that strategy. But one key part remains, which is the people within your organization. You have to bring them with you. The co-creation of that vision or that strategy or that direction that the industry is having or progressing towards, you have to bring the people with you. And what we've seen across all the geographies, that we're all working in a different way. We're all living in a different way. We're all socializing in a different way. And that leadership engagement is ever so important now. Engaging with your people as much as you possibly can, in a visible way, if you possibly can. My calls with my team is very short and quick. So it's just like we're just having a conversation, but throughout the day. And this is a new way of working. This is a new way of being able to adjust to the environment that we're in at the moment. So being flexible in mindset, being flexible in terms of how to get the best out of your people and engaging with your people in a way, being flexible in your thinking, actually, it is okay to work from home. Of course it is. And actually, I've seen fantastic results from people that are working from home because they're just in their own environment and they may have their own quirkiness of doing something. But it is the value that you're unlocking. So we must understand and we must lead emotionally as opposed to with a strategy or a structure. And that's what I would guide leaders to think a little bit more about. How do you connect with your people in a unique way and in a way that sort of brings the best out of them?
I think really the situation that we're all currently having is that it has opened up the eyes that people are able to work at home. Yes, there are some quirks here and there and things like that, but it could be as effective if managed properly. And the term manage here is probably the key word, that it can't be managed like it was in an office environment. It has to be managed slightly differently, whatever that slight is, then let's say organizational depending as well as person depending, individual depending, but it certainly is possible to do it. And looking back at it, and I think I will touch upon a question that has been actually asked by the audience, but since TK brought it up, is how to properly identify the talents that we need moving forward. So how to train talent, for example. And I think from the beginning, the first question to the last, we've touched upon this word of talent. And if I look at the current generation of workforce coming in, they're probably the first one that really thoroughly enjoyed COVID-19 because they no longer have to sit an exam in an exam environment. They have to take an exam at home. This is something that, let's say I was a child, I would have dreamed of having to take my exam at home. But these are the new generations that are coming into the workforce that, let's say towards the end of their education, it was different from everybody else. And coming into the new workforce, how is this going to change? Are we as organizations ready to adapt to this new, even whether there is COVID or there isn't, it is the adaptation of the organization. Can we adapt to the new generation's way of working, which is, let's put it frankly, centralizes around their mobile phones? So what are your thoughts on that, Vicky, in terms of how do we look at talent moving forward? And maybe what kind of skills are we looking at, especially in the world whereby digitalization, automation, things like blockchain comes into effect, things like virtual presence, that's what we are doing today. What kind of talents are we looking at? What kind of skill sets?
I think we touched on many of the comments that TK alluded earlier on. Many organizations are looking for really rounded talent. It's you will still need the deep expertise that goes all the way into sort of academic and your traditional roots of universities and whatever sort of expertise you might come out from on the other side. And you'll still need the sort of the broad skills of one who can sort of think quite openly and bridge between many ideas. And it is not so much about skills and sort of degrees that one individual has. It is more about the culture that they come with, the behaviors that they come with, and how they interact with other team members. Again, this hasn't happened because of COVID. It was kind of like the direction that many of the industries were already traveling in. So upskilling and being able to acquire new skills. The world is moving at such an unprecedented rate in terms of technology advances. Many of us grew up when we were looking at things like autonomous vehicles, if I can name Knight Rider, or you were looking at sort of smartwatches, if I can name Dick Tracy, or you're looking at sort of visual displays and communicating in the way we're doing now. These were sort of sci-fi positions back in the 70s and 80s. And guess what? They're all realities now. But the rate at which technology is progressing and advancing is actually really unprecedented. And we must have an environment that allows creativity and innovation to come and survive and adapt quickly and quickly diffuse as well. We can't keep every idea going because it becomes just really impossible to manage. So a lot of the ecosystem conversation comes out, and a lot of the sort of the being able to adapt quickly, being able to acquire new skills quickly comes into this this thinking. But most importantly for us, it is the behaviors of the individual together augmented with the skills and capabilities that they bring.
TK, what about your thoughts on this? Since you were the one that asked the question in the first place, you must have something in your head that you wanted to let out.
Actually, there are two parts. What we have when we were kids, we used to fight with neighbors and we make up with friends. All right, and friendship has a different meaning to the millennials, and I think we have to teach them how to relate. They relate to the phone in ways that we don't understand, but relating to humans, we got to guide them and nurture them. However, I think the new sets of skills in terms of talent, I mean skill set, then you're talking about talents that we can nurture. In other words, they must come with some basic skill sets that are very different from us because time has moved so fast. In terms of, like you say, imagination and creativity, You mentioned all those things and Star Treks and all that. Those are our inspiration. Those are the toys that we created today. What are their inspiration that we can nurture to create the products of tomorrow? I think that linkage, I'm still trying to fathom out how to do. However, I think to understand them is number one. I used to pay my children to try out new phones for me as an incentive because they learn them faster than we do. They're wired differently. And things like, the grasp of technology that without fear, they are very good at. But however, I think the human side of things, we used to go into meeting, Dr. Vicky. We ask each other, how are you doing? How's your family? How's your dog? Have you heard that from the youngsters? It doesn't exist. So there is a mismatch somewhere that I'm trying to work on so that they can relate to me, the younger generation, probably because I'm too old. But on the other side of things, I would like to go into their world because without understanding that, I can't manage that talent that they have and understand the new skill sets that they need to be in part with. So mentoring is one thing, but the skill sets requirement are very different. And to like talent building, it's a big topic, but define talent and the new skill sets that we desperately need in a mechanical world that we came from into a electrification world, into a software world. They need to bring that in now. We can't bring that in, and how to bridge that gap. So that to me is very important right now. And COVID has made it very clear. Unless you move forward, you reset pre-COVID, you will be dust. You'll be gone before you even know it.
Yeah. So thank you very much for that. I'm just skimming through all the questions that I'm getting from the audience as well. Just to link it up to what we're discussing, I have one question here relating to the youth. I've kind of lost it. Okay, there we go. What do you think on how youth could help with post-COVID implementation? That's the question that I have. Maybe TK, would like to take this?
Yeah. They have got a different perception of life, and what they see.
It's usually thumbs up.
Yeah. what give them the rush. It's totally different. We are so into the job that we're doing, like Dr. Vicky was mentioning the other day. Now you're mentally tired before you're physically tired. They just, hey, I don't want any of that. I have been, there's one scenario when I'm trying to promote somebody and he says, you know what? You didn't employ me for the managerial task. You employed me for my technical task. Can you leave me alone? You never heard of that in our generation. No, who wouldn't want a promotion? It doesn't matter what it means. The answer is always yes. And you get people questioning you, things like that. So that part is different. And I think they have a lot to bring because they appreciate the environment they're in and the lifestyle and the environment. Okay. So it's a different world, but we need to learn that from them. But however, I think the talent, they have to have the right skill set. And we have to define that for them before they can join, that we can nurture them. Otherwise, it's very difficult to bridge the gap. They're definitely good to have.
Vicky? Would you like to weigh in on this?
My thoughts, sure. My sort of thoughts would be diversity and inclusion comes in various different shapes and forms, and youth definitely bring a perspective that is unique and strengthens any resilience to a strategy that is being formulated. So, some of the examples that in my personal view, that has worked really well for me is reverse mentoring. I have mentors who are considerably younger than me, and I'm their mentee. So it's having that kind of relationship, having a different perspective. I love the way TK engages with the youth. Obviously, you can see the huge amount of energy there that, they are not just our future. They can make a change today. And we need to understand and bring them into this challenge that we have today to get that diverse perspective so we can be much more resilient as we plan for the future.
Yep. Okay, so moving on to the next question. I have a question here that all three of us, so TK, Vicky, and myself, that we're very closely connected to MITE. I'm being asked what would be your or our top priority recommendations for Mike to embark on a immediate or even medium term. So what are our advices or recommendation to Mike in terms of what we could do with the government and industry? Vicky, how about you tackle this question first?
Sure, I can start first. I think we have a considerable role to play and bridge the conversation and bridge the narrative between government and industries. And once we know what our sort of direction at a national level looks like in terms of industry forward or some of the initiatives that we have towards smart manufacturing, automation, robotics, if I can just classify the manufacturing industry sector, and then to really understand what are the skills and capabilities that are missing, and how do we put an ecosystem of partnerships for co-collaboration and co-creation. Now, many of you will say, well, that's what you should have been doing before the COVID. I think you're absolutely right. But now where we have an opportunity is actually we're challenged in a way because of the demand not fitting with supply. So tough choices have to be made. And when tough choices have to be made, it is about, is it the preservation of jobs or is it the preservation of capabilities? And MITE is in a really unique position to be able to quickly understand and communicate on which other industries that we need to focus on with jobs, which may be with scale, and which other industries that we need to identify and protect because of the capability, because it took us so long to get there, and we shouldn't now lose it. And that's where we need to focus very quickly on the narrative of and stitching together the government position together with industrial direction, and then the people and the skills and the capabilities and the ecosystems and the platforms and the funding frameworks that needs to sit that ensures that we make the right decision into the future that we're going, in this case, if I look at it from manufacturing the industry forward.
Okay. TK?
Coming as an outsider, okay, I think Mike definitely understands very well on technology convergence. And that is something very clear to everyone pre-COVID. And if Mike, given Mike's position to be able to, I suppose, do a very deep dive with the rest of the government departments in the government to look at strategy collaboration. Instead of 15 guys talking about the same word in 15 different directions, I think now is a good time to sit 15 guys down and say why we define it 15 different ways with the same word and trying to sync it now and collaborate and have an understanding that we might decide to drive in three-dimensional way, but who is taking X, Y, and Z, you know? And then you will have a very focused effort given the knowledge of technology convergence and high technology requirement and the country's requirement put together. And I think it's like me, when I work, I need a whiteboard to doodle. The minute you do 4 pages of that and everything is staring you in the face and you're wondering why you didn't see the picture, because it's there. And I think Mike is in the right position to bring everyone together or bring subgroups together to do that, so that it is a concerted effort. And so for the government and the country to be able to say, for example, focus on talent, where, which direction, what environment, how will it impact the country, how would it impact the industry we're trying to assist, or what we're trying to grow for the country in the future. Mike, I think, is an absolute perfect position to do that. Sorry if I've said the wrong thing, but I think looking from the outside, it looks like a nice way of putting it.
No, I appreciate your candidness for this, and I think that you've touched on several important points where Mike has already had this even before COVID-19 and certainly carried on throughout the MCO period, and I'm confident that this will happen post COVID-19. But this is where I think that it is key here to really identify the gaps. I mean, this is something that we have already been building. Again, regardless of COVID, this is something that we have been looking at. How education and industry, especially in Malaysia, has caused a divergence in terms of capabilities. If I look at aerospace engineers, for example, I could sit in a room, 3 generations worth of aerospace graduates at different times, and they will all be learning the same thing. And this is then the big question mark that you have to ask. Why is it that a 60-year-old versus a 40-year-old versus a 30-year-old versus a 20-year-old is learning the exact same thing, regardless of which university, but they're learning basically the same thing since eons ago? Okay? This is something that we will need to change. And it's the same ideology that companies have to as well. TK, you mentioned about it's easier to navigate smaller companies because they can change in a much faster and quicker way. Whereas for a larger company, this may seem as a dream, but we still try to get this to be done. So I think now is really, we have known the gap before. Now we will, whether we like it or not, have a much larger gap than before. Okay? Whether it's due to the issues of COVID-19 that has been pressed upon us, the reduction in demand, the gaps, and I like what was mentioned, jobs versus capability and technology convergence. All of this are then key to say that, okay, we know that these technologies are converging, whether it is from the same sector that you're working in or a completely different sector. This is coming straight to your face. Do we have the correct people to handle this technology convergence? The question could be maybe. And I think that is the more dangerous answer to have. That is maybe. Yes, but it still depends on the person. No, what can we do to change about it? But it's that maybe answer that would tell us we have not answered this or tackled this correctly. We really need to look at it.
Yeah, you can define the talent pool immediately. What is required by all the requirements put together.
Yeah.
Oh, just a quick one. For example, we talk about EV. We're no longer talking about batteries. We're talking about solid state batteries. We're talking about hydrogen fuel cell as a range extender. And they're talking about electric plane.
Elon Musk might not like what you've just said just now, but I'll let that slide.
But you can see everyone is going at lightning speed. But how are we grasping in terms of the talent requirement to go into this field that we're talking?
So I think, and Vicky, you can jump in here if you like. I would say that this is really the immediate goal that we need to set out. That this gap, whether it is you're talking about the convergence of technology, the gap that we're seeing in terms of the important key skill technology that we need to have, and as well as the talent gap that we already have, and now it's probably even worse. Whether the talent gap that occurs from education over the industry, or even the talent gap that we will see in industry in itself, that we're not prepared or that we are going to lose. So I think this is really the immediate, and then moving from there, once we identify, we can really see what are the mid-term investments and goals we need to have to really overcome the current condition that we are seeing. Vicky, would you like to add some last pointers on this?
Thank you. If I just sort of take a holistic approach on this, the way we're positioned in Malaysia, the proximity and the connectivity with ASEAN, the young talent opportunities, the forward thinking in what smart manufacturing or manufacturing and many other sectors, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, automotive, will look like for the country. In many ways, if you take a step back and look at it, Malaysia is opportunity rich. The challenge is, how do we make the right choices? If we decide to do all of those, we'll probably spread ourselves too thinly. And what we really need to do, and this is where it kind of like links up to your last question, the challenge that we will have and MITE will have, and we're very focused on this in MITE, is to make sure we put all the lenses on and put the right direction and the right focus that works for a sustainable Malaysia, quite frankly, as we look into what the future for us looks like. We will have to be selective. We will have to make choices. Some of them will be hard choices. Some of them will be very focused on pragmatic choices, but we will have to make choices, because if you try and do everything, you spread too thinly.
Yes. Okay, I have 3 questions in regards to technology. I'll start with one of it.
Define the requirement or what you're trying to get the outcome to be. Yeah.
Okay, Vicky?
Yeah, at the end of the day, AI is a tool. And TK just mentioned, it is the data that is critical here. And AI is a tool of being able to unlock insights from that cluster of data. And where I have seen this being successful is where you start to, in some of the other industries, you start marrying together perhaps COVID patterns in the countries together with the logistic of your supply chain, together with the host and the source country data. And that unlocks a level of assurance or certainty to business continuity. I've seen that happen in some of the other industry sectors. So it's a tool that can help to identify patterns in a much more pragmatic manner, which isn't new to us. We always knew that. But AI is definitely a very good tool when it comes to the huge amount of data and unlocking insights quickly for building a level of assurance in the business and thinking.
Okay, then jumping on to another question that's very similar. How do you think, or what technology do you both think is key for us to either recover back to 2019 level, or to really supersede what we thought was possible? What are the key technologies that you have in mind that would really help us to weather through this?
I think from my side, it's very, very straightforward. We started our journey on digitization and electrification. I think those 2 technologies are absolutely essential for the sustainability of the way we will travel in the future in the industry. And they're the two areas that we'll continue to build a robust strategy for.
Do you think that the climate that we have today has fast-tracked this agenda? Is it something that we now have to look at it more seriously than we did before? Of course, it was serious before. But is it something that has fast-tracked this agenda?
No, the challenge has always been there. It's not COVID that's opened up those optics. The industry was always talking about sustainable aviation. Is talking about it more now. I don't think it's fast-tracked it, but it is definitely brought the conversation much more progressive, and there's a lot more inputs coming from not just industries, but regulators, consumers, societies, and governments.
Yes. Just to let you know, Vicky, your connection is a bit fuzzy now, so I'll move it on over to TK and what his thoughts are on this matter.
Yeah, I think everyone seems to think about going back to 2019. We have to stop thinking that way. There is no moving backwards. I disagree with moving backwards. I can use 2019 as a platform to move forward and to identify the weaknesses that you have to reinforce. But no way are you going to return to 2019, because that will give you some really wrong paradigm shift in the opposite direction. Should be looking what you can achieve 3 years from now, ASAP. If you don't do that, you are going to totally miss the plot, because COVID, like you say just now, has created things like Alibaba and everything. It's not going backward. It's going forward. It's talking about using money, virtual money and everything. It's going forward. It's not going backward. In 2019, it was a dream. It was a plan. Which Dr. Vicky says, yes, you're going to reference it, but you have to move forward minimum 3 years to get any advantage out of this.
So what do you think are the key technologies that, let's say, the automotive or even electronic sector would be looking at?
We had
Give me the dream of 3 years to 5 years from now.
In very simple terms, we try to identify verticals of technology. And do you know, none of them work without software? And I'm not talking software as a product. I don't mean writing software to create a software package. I mean software as in part of the requirement to start. I've seen people using cell phone to start a car, to enter a car, to run the entertainments in the car to identify it's you. None of that is electronics. It's only a phone. It's all about the software, how you utilize software to create new potential. So without software transformation, which I'm selling to everyone right now, internally and externally, without the software transformation, you're not going to get there in 3 years from now.
Okay, thank you both for your insights. Looking at the time, we have about 7 to 8 minutes before the session has to end. I'm just going to filter through these questions and pick one out. Okay, so many governments are channeling huge funds to rescue their airlines and automakers. Do you agree with this move, both Vicky and TK? And if not, what are the better alternatives that you have in mind? So I think Vicky's still having some connection issue. I don't see him back on the webcam yet. So maybe TK, you could handle this first.
You got to stop the downward spiral. If the industries are not moving, people will be retrenched. You'll be going on a downward spiral. Everything is going to go pop. So I think the governments are not wrong. However, there has to be this. I would call is the phase one contingency, but they have to make a lot more plans to support this. Okay, but this is to protect jobs because, like I said, if I announce to my guy, you have to be probably everyone end up with 50% salary so that everyone has something to bring home. Amounts to the same thing what you're seeing here.
Vicky, are you online?
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
we can hear you.
Great, thank you. This is not in any company's making. This is not in any industry's making. It is a situation that all industries and sectors and companies are facing globally. It's been encouraging the way the governments across many geographies have got involved and got engaged. And quite frankly, have had to put a huge amount of funding to rescue many of the industries. I think it's necessary to do so at that point. But you can't create demand. And that's really important to realize that you can't create demand. And the shift of the focus from many of the governments is, I sense, going to be towards what do we now try to do? Do we try and protect the jobs, or do we try and protect the capabilities, or do we do both? And there'll be the questions that will be fitting in terms of what the national strategy looks like today and what it might look like tomorrow.
Sorry, you got dropped off towards the end there. Vicky? I think we're having issues with Vicky's side.
Okay, can you?
Yeah,
can
okay,
you hear me
you're
again?
back now, yeah.
Great. I don't know which point you got me, but or lost me. My sort of closure was that the government's role is now to see how do we continue to protect in the certain sectors jobs, in other sectors capabilities, and build a much more robust national strategy integrated with the companies that are residing in country to make sure that the economic sustainability and stability is in place. So it's encouraging to see the way the governments have enacted and got engaged, but we all know that can't last forever.
Yeah. Do you think that the government could do more to help to protect these key sectors that we're having?
I think we need to first signal and identify exactly what are the key sectors, what are the key skills and capabilities that we need to preserve, and then be able to quite clearly identify where that fits with the national strategy, and such that it would be a huge challenge for us if we start to lose capabilities, and then in 3 years down the line, we have to create capabilities again. That is what we must avoid at all costs.
DK, I'm hearing you.
I think
I'm seeing your reaction, but not hearing you. I think you're muted.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Basically, what I'm trying to say is this: you got to decide what you want to preserve 3 years from now. not backwards. What you're heading for 3 years from now. And you got to make sure those skills are alive. And you cannot restart. If you lay off everyone and then you want to come back and start it again, it's going to cost you time, and other competitors will be there. So you got to keep it alive, so you'll be the first one to get in the game when the sector is revived. You got to be the first one in the game 3 years from now. And that is what the strategy has to roll back. It's like looking at the goal you're trying to set and work backwards what you can do for it. It's never from the ground up, but it's from 40,000 feet and trying to capture that. Right?
Okay, good. Thank you very much. I think before I summarize and conclude the session, any last thoughts from both yourself, TK and Vicky? No, TK.
Okay. I think the government has got a much clearer view in Malaysia if they want to, because all the industries are here and everyone's talking. You don't need a consultant with a paper to tell you what's happening, because even they don't know. They have to find out from all of us. If you got all the free industrial zone in the country with all the big players in the world residing here, I think you should call for a teh-tarik session. They will tell you from the horse's mouth what is happening. You don't need a middleman to sell that to you in a report. Just buy satays, do the local kanduri style, and everyone is more than happy to talk because they have benefited from being in Malaysia. They will offer their 2 pennies worth.
We will need to wait for Vicky to fly over, or to be able to fly over, and then we can have this session. Vicky, some concluding remarks from you?
Sure. I think we touched on some very significant topics. So first of all, thank you for arranging this, and thank you for allowing us to share views with the audience. This is a pandemic. This is not in our making. And this is really the opportunity to really start bringing partnerships and collaborators together in a unique way that brings government, industry, and academia, and uses opportunity as a catalyst to springboard into the future. We must all start working at a national level and an industry level, a focus on resilience, and we must look at the role that our people, skills, capabilities has to play in that. And all of this is a great opportunity for us. The ASEAN is just a stone throws away and a huge opportunity for us. And if we can get these hard challenges right, we have a huge opportunity in forward looking.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm just going to briefly sum up everything that we've talked about today. So we've gone through 5 questions, and I think all the questions have been intertwined together to talk about the resilience that we have faced through the MCO time, through the COVID-19, and the kind of resilience that we will need to recover and to move forward to the next phase of things in terms of technology, talent, and where the companies can grow and sectors can grow. I think sustainability is also a very key thing that we need to take into consideration more heavily now than ever before. Resilience is part of it. Sustainability is definitely the other. To know that although we do have weak demand currently that we're seeing, it doesn't mean that we will need to forego what we have set our goals for, even pre-COVID-19, and to sustain the kind of technology forwardness that we have looked at. And last but not least, I think this is something that we all agree upon, is to really protect the capability that we have built thus far, all the years that we have done in terms of our R&D, in terms of our business models and whatnot like that, is to protect the core essence of what I think what was put beautifully, what we really need 3 years from now, given the recovery phase that all sectors of industries are looking at. What is it, the technology that we are looking at 3 to 5 years from now? What are the skill sets that we need? And we have, not luxuriously, but we have the time now today to build and cover up these gaps that we are identifying. And I think Mike is one of the key players here that could really, as Vicky so nicely put it, to bring together the academics, the universities, government, and the industry to really have this, and I'll use your words, this teh-tarik session. Once Vicky is able to travel, I think this is something that we will need to come together, discuss, and to really isolate gaps that then we can move forward in terms of involvement of government, industry, and academia that we could utilize and leverage to move forward. Not to 2019 numbers, DK, but to move forward to the numbers that we are foreseeing that we could have much better than 2019 as a reference, and moving forward in terms of what technology we can gain together with the new talents that are coming into the mix. So, gentlemen, and if there's nothing also on Mike's side as well, maybe we can have the hosts come online with the voice. If there's nothing else, I think we could close this session.
Yeah. Thank you very much to Dr. Liu, the moderator for today, and our panelists for the fruitful discussion. And we hope today's talk has benefited all. And we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar session. And please do follow us on Mike Malaysia Twitter, IG, Facebook, and website for further information. You can also contact the Secretariat to subscribe to Mike's webinar series. With that, have a nice evening ahead, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Thank you, Dr. Vicky. Thank you, TK. Thank you, Dr. Liu.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good day ahead. Thank you. Bye. Nice. All right.